Grand risings, beautiful people. Welcome to Wake Up with Sonia Poulton and guests. It is Monday, the 25th of August, 2025. It is exactly 9 a.m. British summertime. And thank you so much for being here. Wherever you are watching us, whether you're in the live chat or whether you're watching on playback or whether you're on YouTube or Rumble, Spotify, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us here. I truly appreciate it. And welcome to the show that knows you are not broken. You are breaking free. Oh, yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So thank you, all of you in the chat this morning. How are you doing? I hope you are absolutely well. And thank you, Becky Hall, for that early super chat. You are an absolute star. So what's on Wake Up today? We will be joined by historian and author Andrew Lownie. He'll be discussing that Prince Andrew biography. Oh, yes, indeed. And we'll also be joined by former senior coroner's officer Stephanie Davis, who has some very serious concerns about the convictions of Lucy Letby. And there was a transcript released on Friday of Ghislaine Maxwell. Very interesting stuff. Plus, Lucy Connolly is now out. If you don't know who she is, she's probably the UK's most famous prisoner, or ex-prisoner rather now. And the Home Office. We'll be talking plenty about what's going on around the UK in terms of the protests, the Home Office, and everything about that, really. Lots of issues surrounding that. And what is Mass Fatality Resilience Capability? Well, I will tell you. And lots of people have contacted me and said, what is that? Well, I hopefully I can reveal more shortly. And Ofcom, US finally makes Ofcom back down. This is getting interesting. Proper pushback now coming from US platforms, which is fantastic, which is not the same that could be said from UK platforms. And also double standards. We'll be looking at a viewer's email about women attacking men and interesting stuff. Plus your shout, plenty of emails from you. And we will end with the courage to be disliked. It's not a new philosophy. It's been around since at least 2013 when the book was published, but it's been given a resurgence. And I thought, let's revisit it because it's a great philosophy. Actually, I like it. And how are you all today? Grand risings to you all, you wonderful people. Can you hear me well? Can you hear me well, beautiful people? Can you? Grand risings, family. Lovely day out there. Did I see that it was Teresa's birthday? Happy birthday, Teresa, who's often in the comments. God love you. Greetings to you, Fred and Natasha and Rosanna. Morning from rural Italy. Bet it's lovely there. Have you been to Carnival, Sonia? Not yet. No, not yet. Monday is the adult day. Just seen a headline saying British girls are now carrying knives and other weapons. Dear Lord. Plenty to say about that shortly. Did you know today's a bank holiday in the UK? It's known as the August bank holiday or summer bank holiday. It's a public holiday in the United Kingdom. Originally, the holiday was held on the first Monday of August across the country, but was changed in the late 1960s to the last Monday in August for England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. It remains the first Monday in August for Scotland. In 2014, there were proposed changes to this bank holiday. A private member's bill was introduced by this man. His name is Peter Bone. He's former deputy leader of the House of Commons, and he served on the front bench under PM Liz Truss. And Peter Bone suggested that we rename this August bank holiday as Margaret Thatcher Day in honour of obviously the late Prime Minister, but the bill failed to progress past the first reading. Thank goodness for that. So Peter Bone, that Peter Bone, in October 2023, a parliamentary investigation found that Peter Bone had bullied and been sexually inappropriate with a young male member of staff. And it recommended that Bone be suspended from the House for 6 weeks. And it was the beginning of the end for him after 18 years at the trough. And he wasn't a candidate at the subsequent by-election held the following year. So thanks, Peter Bone, for your Margaret Thatcher suggestion. But the August bank holiday is a sunny affair in the UK. And I don't wish to ruin it by remembering it with any associations at all with that pedo protector, Margaret Thatcher. So there you go. Yes, indeed. There you go. And let's just remove him. Get all the chills and shivers there. Thank you, Swiss Miss, for your super sticker. What a star you are. And I don't wish to be overly dramatic, and I try not to be, because I know there's so much of it going on. You don't hear me pushing we're going to have a civil war narrative. It's not something I like to do. I try not to fan the flames of anger people are feeling across the UK and the world, but we must be careful right now. And I say that with as much caution in place as I possibly can. There are very angry anti-migrant protests happening all across the UK. And I have it on good authority from two sources that there is a special command in place. And police have been preparing for potential unrest this weekend and today. And over the last few weeks, thousands of people have protested near the Bell Hotel in Epping, Forest, Essex. That's where it all started, really. That's where all the protests this year all started. Here you go. And it's important to remember why these protests started, by the way, and the growing concern that people have about complete strangers, unvetted, being dumped down into our communities. And at the end of the show, I want to read from viewer Emma Beasley and what she has to say about her local community and the concerns they have there. But back to the Bell Hotel in Epping. So the protest started there because 41-year-old Hadash Kebatu from Ethiopia was charged with sexual assault, harassment, and inciting a young teen girl to engage in sexual activity. He denied the offences. He's remained in custody ahead of a 2-day trial that begins tomorrow. There's a second man living at the same hotel, Mohammed Shawak. He's 32. He's a Syrian national. He's been charged with 2 counts of common assault and 4 of assault by beating concerning 4 complainants. And following a hearing before magistrates in Chelmsford, Essex, he was remanded into custody. And we understand, and when I say we, the press, that's been fed to the press that the offences that Mohammed Shawak has been charged with are alleged to have taken place within the hotel. And I think it's really important to bring this point in at this moment. That is, first of all, thank you, DJ Morpheus on X, for bringing this to my attention today. Very timely. And a Freedom of Information request has revealed that housing potential criminals in these hotels is not as unusual as people think. Official guidance has been obtained through a Freedom of Information request, shows that companies running migrant hotels are required to accept individuals who have previously been convicted of crimes abroad and subsequently released on bail. What now? They've been convicted of crimes abroad, subsequently released on bail, and then housed in these hotels in the UK. There's a 117-page Home Office documentation which explicitly states that accommodation providers must acknowledge and agree that some residents may be ex-foreign national offenders released on criminal bail. For goodness sake, no wonder people are in uproar. The government agenda has put people in danger. We've got enough of our own crims. We don't need to be importing them. This is ridiculous. So going back to the Bell Hotel, which has been absolutely at the forefront of this, including with legal action. So what happened was Epping Forest District Council sought and were awarded a temporary injunction to stop migrants being placed at the Bell Hotel in Epping. It's owned by Samani Hotels Limited. I believe that that's 2 members of the same family. And Mr. Justice Iyer made his judgment. He refused a last-ditch attempt by the Home Office, by the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, no less, to get the council's case dismissed. And it was ruled that asylum seekers must be moved out of the hotel by 4 p.m. British summertime on the 12th of September. All 80 rooms at the hotel are apparently occupied, and as of last month, it was home to about 140 men. Of course, this is concerning. Now we know it's actually policy to put ex-crims in these hotels. And the thing is, this was an absolute significant win for Epping Forest Council, and the Home Office had warned that the decision would substantially impact its ability to house asylum seekers in hotels across the UK. Well, it will shock absolutely no one to discover that ministers are using taxpayer money to appeal the ruling. Security Minister Dan Jarvis announced on Friday that the government will be appealing it. And in turn, the Bell Hotel owners will be appealing it. So the government and the Bell Hotel both want the Bell Hotel to remain housing migrants. Some of them awaiting bail, some of them likely to be ex-criminals. This is outrageous. I mean, this is very, very, very concerning. And here's the thing is that if the government is successful in seeking its right to appeal, then what it will do is it will appeal to overturn the entire ruling. And Home Secretary Yvette Cooper said the government was committed to closing all asylum hotels, but said it needed to happen in a properly managed way. Methinks she speaks out both sides of her mouth. It's unclear whether, obviously you can't tell in these cases, but it's unclear, what position the court will take, whether they will give the Home Office leave to appeal. And as I say, the hotel owners are also seeking permission to appeal. And the directors have a bunch of other businesses together. The directors of the Bell Hotel are Niloufer Hassan Samani and Hassan Ali Kamali Alibi Samani. So they sound like two members of a Muslim family to me, which I have no problem with at all. But I have to wonder what is the connection in terms of the people that they are taking into their hotel and why it's so important to them to overturn the ruling by Epping Forest Council. And the Refugee Council said that we shouldn't be having migrants or asylum seekers in hotels. What they want is dispersal accommodation. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with what dispersal accommodation is, but essentially it's longer term self-catering accommodation, usually a private dwelling. So it could be, private rental provided by the Home Office to asylum seekers and refugees while their claim is being processed or after it has been determined. And the idea with dispersal centres is, first of all, it's a no-choice basis, because the idea was to disperse asylum seekers into all different parts of the country to stop people kind of forming ghettos. That was the idea, so that there was an even distribution across all councils across the UK to distribute the responsibility of housing asylum seekers. Figures released by the government on Thursday revealed that the number of asylum seekers being housed in hotels has reached 32,000, over 32,000, an 8% increase in the year since Labour came to power. And it's obviously it is problematic. Now we know that there is an actual policy. And I don't need to, people who watch this show know my position. I did a psychology degree and my dissertation was about the demonization of asylum seekers. I've always been very much in favor of a multicultural society. But even I can see the problems with unvetted men, huge volumes of men just being dumped down in communities, and some of them have been ruled as criminals in their own countries. I'm not convinced that we should be allowing them in. I'm not convinced at all. And I'm sure you all have plenty to say about that. And by the way, they are now using UK nursing homes, which they are now hiring to take over for migrant accommodation. So everybody is, like all Brits, are being housed out, basically, the elderly, people who might want to use hotels. For this. It is an absolute shite show, frankly, absolute rotten to the core. And we know it. We know it's an agenda and it's really problematic. And what's this? I think we should talk about this next, because for many people, what I've just talked about and this go hand in hand. Many people have written to me about this over the last week. It's a contract on the government's own website. It does sound concerning, but what's the truth? So what it calls for is Mass Fatality Resilience Capability. And it's a procurement, an award. It talks about the award being awarded to Fuse Marquees Limited to provide sort of backup in the event of a mass casualty. And it talks about in the event of a major incident resulting in a large number of fatalities, which could overwhelm existing body storage. So that sounds kind of scary, right? That sounds like mass morgue stuff, right? That's what it sounds like. Anyway, the contract has been awarded to Fuse Marquees Limited. Let's have a little look at fuse marquees. Fuse marquees supply marquees to, amongst other industries, the film industry. Very interesting. It's a family-run business run by Ian and John Few. They're listed in Bromsgrove, England. They say we build amazing event marquees and temporary structures. We are the leading provider of event marquees, temporary buildings and structures in the UK. And they talk about having an unrivaled range of structures, about sustainability driven, about coordinated project management, about a good, strong health and safety culture, and yada, yada, yada. So what is the reality behind that? Are they preparing us for something really scary? So first of all, it's important to note that a system like this has been in place for a long time, at least 20 years. This is not new. It replaces actually a similar system, and people are on high alert because we are living in a society that is geared up to get us to think the absolute worst at the moment. So I don't blame anybody who's written to me and said, what on earth is this? Can you look into it? So the government say that we should always be prepared to expect an event that could leave hundreds of people dead. Now, I'm not quite sure why we should always expect to experience that. But that is the official version. The Home Office said that the new contract is designed to replace a now 2-decade-old system. A direct quote from the Home Office: this contract seeks to update capability that has existed since 2005 and which has been maintained under all governments in that period. It is a procurement process that began under the previous government in 2023. And they have had previous initiatives like this, but you can't blame people for being concerned when there's so much problems happening out on our streets. And we're hearing that criminals are literally being shoehorned into hotels. So really worrying indeed. There was the NEMA system, which was actually reported in a number of publications around 2015. And the NEMA system, National Emergency Mortuary Arrangements, NEMA, and these aim to put in place national arrangements for an emergency mortuary as part of the response to a mass fatality incident. And the idea is that it's kind of like a tented system that would act as some sort of huge, massive temporary morgue for mass casualties. And you can see why Fuse have won the contract. I can. So the idea is that this is nothing new. Please try not to be too overly alarmed about it, people. You know how they like to alarm us. In many respects, it is nothing new, but we can't trust governments, and we certainly can't trust our government. We know that. So always be very, very careful. And let's have a look at this one. Lucy Connolly, she was released last week. And straight in there, the Lucy Connolly A-team interviews with Alison Pearson, Dan Wootton, etc. Lucy Connolly, of course, is the Northampton childminder. She was released from HMP Peterborough on Thursday after serving part of a 31-month sentence for a social media post, which was said to incite racial hatred. She accuses Prime Minister Keir Starmer of weaponising the justice system to stifle free speech, vowing to sue the police and meet with Donald Trump's administration officials. Of course, very heated debate going on in the UK, especially about the fact that she was sentenced for one tweet. She was handed a 31-month sentence after she posted on X. Horrible, horrible, disgusting, revolting words. Lucy Connolly and I would not be bezies. We would not, but I still don't think she should have been imprisoned. And she wrote a very angry, a very upset, a very insightful tweet about setting fire to the hotels. And if that makes me racist, so be it. And this was in the wake of the murder of 3 young girls in Southport in July 2024. And there was a lot of high emotion. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of inciting racial hatred in relation to the post. And now we hear that Nigel Farage, never one to miss an opportunity, will be appearing at the US Congress on September the 3rd, and he'll be taking her case there. It's thought that he'll be discussing her case and about the problems that are taking place to do with the Online Safety Act and actually how that is impacting the US, because it is impacting the US. And this is where Starmer and co I think, are going to come unstuck, because once you start to mess with the US tech bros, you're in trouble, and they're coming after him anyway. Nigel Farage is going to be taking Lucy Connolly's case to the US and yabbering about it, no doubt. And as I say, Connelly has been interviewed by the usual gatekeeper suspects. She says she's considering legal action against the police. And she said that she felt the police were dishonest, claims her words were massively twisted and used against me. And Northamptonshire police said they're hoping to speak with Connelly soon regarding the allegations. And these allegations came about because a press release from the CPS was released following Connelly's guilty plea on September the 2nd, which included a quote from Frank Ferguson, head of the Crown Prosecution Service's Special Crime and Counter-Terrorism Unit, which said, during police interview, Lucy Connolly stated she had strong views on immigration, told officers she did not like immigrants, and claimed that children were not safe with them. And but she disputes this. She said her words were massively twisted. I don't know about that. You only have to look at her ex. Her ex account is just, it's an absolute bin fire. Like I say, me and her would not be bezies, but I can see why Dan Wootton and Alison Pearson would like her. And despite all the media and political support she has received, not everyone agrees that she is a victim. One example is Torsten Bell, MP for Swansea West. He tweeted, utter garbage. She was a prisoner, nothing political about it. Reasonable people can disagree on any given sentence, but the facts are clear. She incited serious violence. PM did exactly nothing. So sticking up for Keir Starmer, but then Torsten Bell probably would, right? He's a Labour man. And she went to jail because of what she did, committing a crime and pleading guilty. Well, yeah, all of that is absolutely true. So just to recap, Nigel Farage is not a hero. Lucy Connolly is not a martyr. There are better examples of a leader than him, and there are better, worthier examples of a deplorable legal system than Lucy Connolly. So just wanted to say that, just wanted to make sure that that was all loud and clear. What else? This man, let's see. I got an image of him. Colin Smyth could be pronounced Colin Smith. Always difficult to tell when they use a Y. Anyway, he's a Labour member of the Scottish Parliament. He's been charged over indecent images of children. He represented South Scotland since 2016, was arrested at a property in Dumfries earlier this month. Smith has been suspended by Scottish Labour and is now listed as an independent on the Parliament website. And he's due to appear at Dumfries Sheriff Court at a later date. Smith said in a statement, "These events have come as a shock and this is a deeply stressful time. I am obviously cooperating fully with any inquiries and hope the matter can be resolved quickly. I am not able to comment further at this stage, and neither am I, because obviously it's a live case." Other than to say Smith previously worked as a modern studies teacher, has children, and it is understood that the party suspended Smith at the weekend when it became aware of the police investigation. Smyth is a supporter of self-ID. You know, the idea that men can declare themselves as women and women can declare themselves as men. And he was once proudly involved, as you can see in this image, with carrying a 16-foot trans flag for a protest, as you do. Live case, as I say, so I shall say no more at this moment. Okay, right. Let me move on. Interesting development. On Friday, just gone, the British government extended the deadline until October to decide on whether to approve China's plans to build the largest embassy in Europe. They want to do it in London. Beijing refused to fully explain why the plans contain blacked out areas. Well, yeah, if you are applying for planning commission, you need to be fully transparent about what you want to use the building for. And if you have plans with blacked out areas, that may be a cause of concern and may explain why those building plans have now been stalled for the past 3 years. So I'm not quite sure why they have got blacked out areas and why they think they're going to be approved, their building, but there you go. Before my first guest arrives, I want to talk about Ghislaine Maxwell. I see she's been squeaking. By the way, a transcript was released on, I think it was Friday, from a 2-day interview Maxwell had with US Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche. And in the interview, Maxwell called Donald Trump, who I know she's hoping he will pardon her. She called him a gentleman. She said he never did anything criminal with Epstein. Well, that is exactly the way to go if you want the pardon from the president, of course. And she made lots of claims, actually, in the 380-page transcript. She claimed that Jeffrey Epstein was once set up on a date with Princess Diana. And she also claimed that she didn't introduce Epstein to Prince Andrew. She said that before she met Epstein in 1991, he lived in London, had high society friends already. That wasn't down to her, because obviously it's largely been claimed that she was his link to British high society. And I think really she largely was. And in the interview, she offered a bizarre reason why Epstein molested young people and children. She claimed that he found his victims, some of whom were 14 at the least. That's the official narrative, but I would say younger. But she said that he found his victims invigorating and liked how they turned him on to new music. These people are psychos. And she said that Epstein became more aggressive after he began taking testosterone, sometimes using 2 patches of hormones a day. She said that he couldn't actually have much sex because of a heart condition, which totally contradicts testimony, which actually talks about how he needed sex at least 3 times a day. And of course, she is absolutely working to get a pardon. Of course she is. There's no doubt about it. The Epstein's victims' lawyers have come out saying, of course, that's what she's trying to do. Brad Edwards, who represents some, said, could her purpose be more transparent? I think not. And also, don't forget that following the interviews, she was moved to a softer prison, like straight away. And that really is the start of her being kind of like emerging back into the sunlight of the so-called free world. And I thought it was interesting last night, they announced that Virginia's got a new book coming in October. She's speaking from the grave, and according to the headlines, taking revenge from beyond the grave in a bombshell memoir. The book is due to be published in October. It said that it's about her experience of being trafficked as a teenager. Nobody's Girl, a memoir of surviving abuse and fighting for justice. According to the bump so far, the autobiography will contain intimate and disturbing details of her relationship with Prince Andrew. The Duke of York, of course, has denied that he ever had sex with Virginia when she was said to be 17. But he still paid her in a 2022 out-of-court settlement, as you do with somebody you've never met and have nothing to do with. It's also thought that they, at the time, agreed a 12-month gagging clause, which would make a lot of sense because she did tweet about that often. She talked about how she was going to write a book after the year. So I suspect that that's all plays, but it feels kind of sad, doesn't it? She took her own life in April. It feels kind of sad that what she wanted to say is only now coming out, that she's no longer on this earth. That feels really sad, actually. Right. I want to talk to somebody who knows about all these things and way more. And here he is, historian and author and agent, Andrew Lownie. How are you, Andrew?
Very well. Nice to talk to you.
Wonderful.
And as you said, an interesting day with the disclosure of Virginia's book.
I mean, Andrew, you're all over the place at the moment, and I mean that in the nicest way possible. Your book is, of course, a bestseller, and I'm so glad to see that, because obviously over the last 4 years when you've been researching it, you've been on and off on my various shows, you were talking about researching it. How difficult was it to research this one, Andrew? There were a lot of obstacles, right?
Yes, well, it's the first book I've done which is primarily based on interviews rather than archives. So trying to get people to talk about the royal family, there's a great deal of deference and loyalty. I mean, former ambassadors, people like that, don't feel they should talk. But eventually I found about 3,000 people who had known them and contacted them, and 300 spoke. So I think this is the first royal biography which has had so many people on the record talking about the royal family. But you're right. I mean, I've failed in 4 years of hundreds of requests to the government to get access to the papers of Andrew as the trade envoy between 2001 and 2011. papers which should be in the National Archives, which they put up every single objection to have these released. And these would, of course, show who was accompanying him on these taxpayer-funded trips, which, according to my research, included his daughters, building up a nice contacts book, and Jeffrey Epstein, and his own private business colleagues, David and Jonathan Rowland. So I think what I've got is the tip of the iceberg and the corruption that I'm afraid went to the heart of the royal family.
Indeed. And I've read many of the reviews around it. They talk about how you've absolutely character assassinated Andrew, because it's a joint book, isn't it? It's about Andrew and his ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson. And I don't think that the British public hold any of these characters with any great affection anymore, because bit by bit, it's really, we've seen that these are opportunistic chances. And I'm being very kind here because some of your revelations are quite gobsmacking. And I saw one interview where you were being asked, are you not worried about the legal implications of some of the things you've said, Andrew?
Well, the book, clearly was very heavily legal by Collins. I think it went through 18 proofs, of which 2 were editorial, and I think 16 were legal. And stuff was being taken out, even at the last minute. So, frustrating because, I know it's true, a lot of the stuff, but clearly we have to be careful. There are issues of privacy as well as libel. No, Collins were very careful. We already had threats from Sarah Ferguson's lawyers before the book came out, saying they were watching us, they were monitoring my social media, and basically, watch out, you're on notice. So, I think they were very aware of that.
This is obviously, it's interesting you've got here because you've previously written about Mountbatten. You've written about other royal members and also about like Guy Burgess, about spies, etc. But this is the first one that is about a contemporary royal. So that in itself is just, it's problematic in so many respects, but some of your revelations are very interesting indeed. Let's do a quick recce, shall we? You say that he had a member of the royal staff moved from his job for wearing a nylon tie and another because he had a mole on his face. You say he had 40 women brought to his hotel room in Thailand over a 5-day visit. And you say that he missed his daughter's 12th birthday party to hang out with Epstein. Was he closer to Epstein than we've been led to believe, Andrew?
Yes, they were both close to Epstein than we were led to believe. They claim they met him in the late 1990s. I showed that they met in the early 1990s. They claim that they broke off all contact in 2010. I showed that they were staying with Epstein as late as 2015. They say that they hardly ever saw him. And yet Deborah Gale, the housekeeper in Palm Beach, said that Andrew was a regular visitor. The house in Mountbatten actually had the Britannia suite where Andrew stayed because he was such a constant visitor. So I'm afraid all the things they've said, can easily be disproved, just as all the things Andrew said in his Newsnight interview can be easily disproved. So I think, we've now got the focus on Fergie after the Ghislaine Maxwell interview, showing that Fergie was much more deeply involved with Epstein than Andrew, or as deeply involved, I should say. And I think, everyone's been saying he should be giving evidence to the police, but I think she should be giving evidence because she's clearly a material witness as well.
They're protected. They're above the law, aren't they?
I'm afraid so. Di Davis, who was former head of Royal Security, has constantly been calling for the Met to investigate. I put an FOI request to see if they had investigated, and they refused to either confirm or deny that. But I think also MPs 20 years ago were saying that Andrew should be investigated by the National Crime Agency because of what he was up to as a special trade envoy. And I think that they should be looking at that. I certainly have information taken out by the lawyers, which I think would be very material to a case.
So his representation of us as a foreign trade envoy, did he do any good for us at all? Or was it all about filling their own pockets?
Well, I think there were moments, where he was useful in the Middle East and elsewhere, where clearly a royal will carry a bit more weight than a politician. But I think the feeling was the Foreign Office didn't quite know why he'd been foisted on them. It just, he had to be found something to do. He didn't really want to do the job and didn't quite know what was going on. The poor people, diplomats at the other end, had to kind of fill things for him to do. So it was all a complete waste of time, a waste of money, and actually in times counterproductive because he irritated so many people on these trips by his rudeness. and arrogance that it was counterproductive. So, I mean, it is a problem. What do you do with Andrew? We kept him in the Navy for as long as we could, over promoted and found jobs for him that no one else actually took on when he left. But I think now, he's now 65. He's now in effect retired. I think the best thing he can do is go to his palace in Abu Dhabi and keep out of the way.
So you also, I think this is interesting about how he's still being protected by the system, because even though obviously he stood back from royal duties following the whole scandal to do with Virginia Giuffre and the payout to her, but you talk about how even though he's no longer involved in royal duties, he's still being absolutely protected by the system.
Yes, I mean, the Foreign Office told diplomats not to talk to me. I mean, clearly lots of politicians. I mean, Jack Straw is a good example. He knows a lot of stories. He claimed to me that he'd sort of only had one dealing with him over Turkey. So, I mean, it's ridiculous. And I think I'm hoping that as a result of the book coming out, people seeing just really what was going on, which is, endemic corruption, that they will perhaps have a change of heart and reconsider and come and actually tell me what really went on. I have had quite a lot of people come forward since the book came out with stories. I mean, really shocking stories about both of them. But the more material one can build up, the more one can make the case, for example, for a parliamentary inquiry into his time as special representative and get some of these ambassadors to give evidence under oath.
It's a very difficult situation that you found yourself in, because you're dealing with a family who are highly protected, obviously, and they have, there's constant propaganda being put out about them, a great deal of protection around them. And it's almost like you were walking into the dark, attempting to get this information. And then, as you've talked about, you had this obfuscation, all these obstacles thrown at you, the protection around them. So I think that's quite tricky. But I think it's interesting you say that people are now coming forward, because that is what happens, isn't it? When we throw an idea out there, oftentimes it actually serves to alert other people that we do care about this situation that they may have been carrying for a very long period of time, and they can talk.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. I think people were appalled by what went on. There was no way to get the story out. And now clearly there is a way of doing it. And these are decent people. I mean, what struck me was these are senior diplomats and naval officers who, put their reputations on the line to go public and be named. And I'm very grateful to them, because there was nothing in it for them except a sense of getting this story out and revealing really what was going on. But I mean, I hope what this will lead to is more royal transparency, not just about their finances, which are incredibly opaque. We need to have, for example, royal wills unsealed, but also to a little bit more openness with archives. All these files should be open. I mean, we should be able to see he was taking on these trips and who they were seeing. I mean, I know from talking to diplomats that he actually was arranging to shoehorn meetings, which were meant to be to promote British trade, to actually do business for some of his business associates like the Rowlands. And that's completely wrong.
That's Tiny Rowland you're talking about, isn't it?
No, this is David and Jonathan Rowland.
Oh, okay.
Who are they run a bank called the Bank Haviland, which he's opened. I mean, he's had them to stay and have tea with the Queen at Balmoral, invited them to children's weddings. I mean, it's a very cozy relationship. They actually basically lent him money, which they then paid off themselves. It's. I mean, the other thing I think we need is a royal register. Again, that was called 4 years ago, a bit like a parliamentary register, where royals put down actually how they're making money.
Yes.
Because, I mean, we know that he has accounts, for example, in China. So a lot of the stuff is offshore, including with the Queen. Fergie's tax affairs were so complicated, she didn't even know which companies she had. And we had this very bizarre thing where she has got multiple companies. None of them seem to be doing any business and therefore don't need to be audited. And one wonders what is actually going on in these companies. The forensic accountant said there's something very odd here. So they need to come clean about what actually they're doing and how they've monetized their position as royals to make money for themselves.
And that's all his family, right? That's him, his ex-wife, his two daughters. They're all sort of cashing in, right?
Yes, I mean we've seen occasions recently with particularly Beatrice, the elder daughter, opening sort of Saudi banks and things. There's a lot going on in the Middle East at the moment with the family, but there was, I think, quite an interesting episode with a High Court case in 2022 with a man called Selman Turk, who was being sued by a Turkish millionairess for fraud. And in the course of that case, it emerged that Andrew had been paid £750,000 by Turk, Fergie 250,000, and even one of the daughters 25,000, money which they couldn't explain where it came from.
It is quite extraordinary, really. I can't believe that people still doff their caps at these people. But you do talk about how you are a monarchist. But Andrew, although you don't outright call for the abolition of monarchy, your book is, as near as damn it, in support of that.
Well, I mean, I speak as a monarchist, but the monarchy has to hold the highest values. I value it, and it shouldn't. We shouldn't be covering up bad behavior and illegal activity. No one, as you say, is above the law, and so it's because I want the monarchy to survive, and I want it to have our respect and trust that we need to weed out these bad apples, because what they do is they undermine the good work that all the others do. Putting public service first rather than their own private interests.
I want to talk a bit about his relationship with Epstein, because Epstein had referred to them both as serial sex addicts. And I think that that's still a very interesting relationship there that we have very little information about. But one of the things that you said that I didn't know was about how Epstein had sold stories about Andrew. To whom had he sold stories?
Well, Epstein, basically traded in information and blackmail. I mean, we know that he filmed people who were caught in his honey traps, and Andrew was one of them. And we know that Andrew was caught in honey traps all over the world. So whether it was Kazakhstan or Russia or the Middle East or China, there, I'm afraid, is footage of Andrew, and which could be used to put pressure on him. And so he's been very, very foolish the way he's acted. I don't think he seems to care. And again, he knows he's protected, so that he just behaves as exactly he wants. But yeah, I mean, Epstein certainly had him. I mean, it was a good, interesting relationship because Andrew gave Epstein status, respectability, some useful contacts from his trade days. And of course, Epstein paid Fergie's bills, again, gave Andrew good contacts, which he talks about in the Newsnight interview, and a ready supply of women.
I mean, it's quite astonishing, really. And your contacts were quite clear that Epstein didn't kill himself.
Well, I mean, I lay out the evidence to show that there are a lot of very strange circumstances around the death. And I mean, since the book has come out, more stuff has come forward. So, for example, I think one of the inmates at the correctional facility says it's impossible to kill yourself. But it seemed to me that there was good evidence. Michael Baden, the coroner, said that it looked more like a homicide than suicide. We've got the sort of cover up with missing bits of film, with pictures of people appearing that night. I heard from one of Epstein's employees that he thinks Trump was behind it. That someone in the facility killed Epstein, but it was sort of given the say-so. And I think what was interesting is that none of the lawyers believe it, because here was Epstein at the beginning of his sort of court journey. He thought he would get himself out through having smart lawyers. And so there was nothing that suggested he wanted to commit suicide. So I think, there's quite a lot of evidence that suggests that this wasn't suicide. And of course, there was a huge kill list, and a lot of people have died in very mysterious circumstances. A lot of the victims have committed suicide. Now, that may be just because of the trauma they've gone through. But people like Steve Hoffenberg, for example, who was Epstein's long-term associate, he died in mysterious circumstances and was absolutely paranoid when he heard that Epstein had died. He knew he was next on the list. So, I think that there are a lot of unanswered questions in this whole saga.
What do you think about the death of Virginia Giuffre and the upcoming book?
Well, I think it's amazing that the book is coming. I mean, I hope it goes beyond the memoir that she had penned, right, because there were clearly criticisms there of inaccuracies, and I don't want that to undermine what she's got to say. But there were rumors that there were going to be a book. I think you talk about her tweeting that the 12-month gag order was over, and actually, what surprises me is it hadn't happened sooner. They say it was delayed because of health issues, but this book I expect to come out literally a year after the gagging order. So we'll have to wait and see, but this clearly is another nail in Andrew's coffin, and possibly others. And we may see it forces, for example, Trump to be slightly more open about what's going on with the Epstein papers.
Are there any similarities that could be drawn between Mountbatten and his wife and Andrew and Fergie?
Well, in both cases, an open marriage. In both cases, it seems a very happy marriage. There are suggestions that Andrew is bisexual, like Mountbatten. Clearly, both of them very highly sexed couples. So yeah, there are some interesting parallels there, and clearly, Mountbatten and Andrew both served in the Navy. I would say Mountbatten was a much more impressive figure. I mean, a very hard-working, clever man, which is not what you could say about Andrew.
So Andrew, you also talk about how early he was sexualized, and I think you talk about how he lost his virginity at the age of 11. Is that correct? He's very, very young.
It is, and I mean, I was surprised when I was told that. My source was pretty reliable. We did, ponder about whether this was, something that should go into the book, but I think it maybe does explain, actually, funny enough, a bit like Mountbatten, who was abused as a young boy, the very sort of sexual activity that he's pursued, the need for constant sexual gratification, the difficulty in establishing long-term relationships. So sometimes you have to slightly put things out there, as you say, in the hope that other people will come forward. In fact, people have come forward. I mean, certainly talking to Heather Down contemporaries at his prep school, they talk about him and a female member of staff there. Someone else has come forward saying that there were strange things going on at Heather Down at the time in terms of sexual abuse. So I'm hoping, having sort of floated this thing on the strength of, as I say, a member of Andrew's staff who would have known, I think, that more information might come forward.
What about the involvement of secret services? We've heard much about Epstein being involved with Mossad. What about Andrew?
Well, Andrew, was fascinated by the secret services. I mean, he actually volunteered his services to Elisa Manning and Buller. And when there was the Iran embassy siege, he wanted to go there while they were pretty busy doing other things to sort of watch it. He did have some involvement with special forces as a pilot in the Navy. He would take snipers off to various on various training exercises. I'm not sure he was ever involved in any actual operations. But he would have picked up material in the Ministry of Defense, for example, when he was there. He would have picked up material as a trade envoy. He did a lot of arms sales. So, there was always a connection. His father was very close to the intelligence services, very interested. And I suspect, like many members of the royal family, there were close connections. We have to remember that many members of staff in the royal household are ex-spooks, ranging from Christopher Geit, who was private secretary to the Queen, to the former head of MI5, who was head of her household.
Very interesting quote in the book about Andrew's alleged involvement with, about Andrew's involvement with Epstein is, if the unconditional truth is ever released, I think the British public would try to impeach the royal family. Very interesting. Expand on that for me.
Well, I think, we've only seen, as I say, the tip of the iceberg in terms of what was going on. A lot has been covered up. I mean, the policy is basically, if we can get it, we'll keep going until we get caught, and then we'll, use all sorts of devices, either to deny it or to use legal action or to put pressure of some kind. And I mean, we have an example of this with Amy Rubach at ABC Television, who had the whole story of Virginia Giuffre and Andrew years ago. And the palace put pressure on ABC Television saying, look, if you want to continue to have access to the members of the royal family and do interviews, then you'll need to drop this investigation. And I think one of the big stories in the book, which hasn't really been picked up, is that actually the investigations into Andrew were not conducted by Newsnight and Emily Maitlis, but by someone called Laura Burns at Panorama in Ireland. And her material was taken and basically given to Newsnight 72 hours before the interview. And I think that the palace thought that that would be a softer interview than one from Panorama, which was a right to reply, and which they'd interviewed Giuffre and had a lot of material, including evidence that Andrew and Ghislaine had discussed Virginia Giuffre's accusations. So this idea that he knew nothing about it, is disproved just by that, quite apart from the fact that there are witnesses who saw him in tramp with Virginia Giuffre. So, I mean, time and time again, he's told the most extraordinary porkies, which, are easily disproved.
So I just want to refer briefly to some of the allegations you make, and I can't get away from this whole idea that he was brought 40 escorts in Thailand. How sure are we that this is true?
Well, they're named sources. So the material comes from a man called Andrew McGregor Marshall, who's the Reuters correspondent out there, who used to hang out with hotel staff. So that was one source. The other source was a man called Ian Proud, who was a diplomat in the embassy there, who had the stories, and indeed of a girlfriend that Andrew took, a half-Thai model called Sonia Poulton, who actually took in the official cars with him on trips. And my third source, who couldn't be named because she's a leading figure in Thailand and would be in trouble. And this came from her driver, who was very friendly with Andrew's driver. So that's three different sources saying the same thing. And in fact, I'm going to be talking just after this interview with another woman in Thailand who has more stories about Andrew in Thailand. It was his sort of playground and where he used to go for his, shall we say, rest and recuperation.
So my understanding really is that Entitled is essentially a book about greed, about this obsession with sex, and about how thoroughly unsavory and unworthy of a public position this pair are. Is that fair, do you think?
Yes, I think that's pretty fair. I mean, I've always wanted to stress it's a book about financial scandal as well as sexual scandal, and it's about how they were protected by the monarchy itself. I think the shocking thing was that the Queen herself turned a blind eye to what Andrew was doing, and indeed would shut down any complaints and colluded, I would say, with him in some of the business activities he was doing in places like Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan.
And just before you leave us, can you confirm or deny whether this is true or not? The whole issue to do with Melania Trump threatening to sue Hunter Biden. I picked up the story that HarperCollins had edited several passages of your book. Is that accurate to do with this issue?
Yes, I mean, Collins put out a statement. I think the feeling was that no one wanted to get into a fight with Trump, just not because it wasn't true, but because of just the costs and the hassle involved. And News Corp, their owners, are being sued by Trump at the moment because of the Wall Street Journal birthday card. Other people like James Carville and Daily Beast have done exactly the same. So I think it was just regarded as prudent and pragmatic. I mean, the Trump material is sort of incidental to the whole book, so it wasn't worth getting into a huge legal fight. I mean, I have a lot of Trump material, and I hope that for the updated paperback, I might be able to use it.
Ooh, exciting. Well, congratulations, Andrew. Well earned. I know you put a huge amount of work into this, and may it long continue, everybody. This is Andrew Lownie. His book is entitled The Rise and Fall of the House of York. Take good care of yourself. Congratulations again, Andrew.
Not at all. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Always a pleasure to talk to you. Have a lovely week. Take care.
Yes.
Andrew Lownie, everybody. There he is. There he goes. And there he goes. There he is indeed. And there he goes. And let me take that off the screen. And I mean, Andrew, filthy human being, right? Filthy. Right. Before I bring in my next guest, there was a story that I missed just before that. Let me just check I've got it. This is, wait, let me just find it. There we go. Yes, we've talked on and off over the last few weeks, obviously, about Ofcom. Ofcom is the broadcast regulator. And Ofcom, so before I actually went on a break, I talked about how they'd start penalising video platforms and social media sites for not complying with its risk assessment demands. And i.e., what have these platforms put in place to protect children? And one of the things is, obviously, it demands that users submit their identification. Well, I'm hearing all sorts of things. all sorts of things from the smaller platforms, including the fact that one or two will be switching from news to sport, considered much lighter and easier to deal with, because they are simply not equipped to deliver news in the UK. That's UK platforms, because they're weaker, smaller, more subservient. But in other quarters of the internet, the fight back has begun, and primarily from the US. Number of sites which had previously blocked UK users so that they would not have to comply with the rules of the Online Safety Act, they've now unblocked people, and that includes Gab. They've kind of done an up yours to Ofcom as one example. But another one of the platforms that is really fighting back is 4chan. Now, 4chan, of course, has been around for ever and a day, but they are absolutely refusing to comply. And they are represented by Preston Byrne, partner of law firm Byrne and Storm. And he talks about how Ofcom has provisionally decided to impose a £20,000 fine with daily penalties thereafter for as long as the site fails to comply with its request. And the US are not happy. And this is in part why Nigel Farage is going over to the US, to US Congress, and talking about the Online Safety Act, because it really messes with the big tech organizations and organizations like YouTube, like X, like Rumble, like Gab, and the American tech bosses do not like it. And they also say that what's going on with the Online Safety Act messes with the First Amendment rights. And that's a problem. And what was interesting was earlier this month, actually about 6 days ago now, and that was US Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. She said that the UK had now withdrawn its controversial demand for a backdoor in an Apple data protection system. And she said she'd work with the president and the vice president to get the UK to abandon its plan. And I think our only hope at this stage is for the US to fight on our behalf, not because they care about our freedom of speech, but because they care about money. They care about the importance of the big tech industries. And sometimes you need enemies to come together in order to be able to fight a cause. And this may well be one of them. Anyway, I sent my own freedom of information request to Ofcom to see who has been fined so far and what they intend to use that money for, because 4chan is one perfect example, £20,000 and then daily penalties thereafter if 4chan refuses to comply. 4chan has absolutely refused to comply. And so I sent a freedom of information request. I wanted to know who has been fined following the August the 7th deadline. And I want to know what they are going to be spending that money on. Anyway, they have responded just saying that my request was received and they will respond within the 20 working days. As per the Freedom of Information Request Act. And so that's what they have. And that was last week. So time is ticking. Be interesting to see who else other than 4chan they have fined and what they're going to be doing with that money. I think it's interesting. I think that's very interesting what's taking place. Right. What do I want to do before I bring in my next guest? Hold on a sec. I think I've got, let me just see if I can, I think this is interesting. So I was contacted by a DWP whistleblower. Very interesting. Obviously, I can't reveal identity, but contacted because my name came into this person's research. And this is already somebody who's been a whistleblower to media. And they contacted me and they said that they have been tracking an individual online. And it turns out this person has had an interest in me for many years. And so as part of the clampdown on people who could work but don't, the DWP are looking at people's online output to determine whether they are well enough to do a job. And I think that's interesting. The person they have been tracking has been unemployed for at least a decade. They believe that this person is feigning sickness. This is what this whistleblower told me. There is not even an up-to-date doctor's visit, yet this person has maintained an online presence, sometimes daily, where this person relentlessly trolls people. And the DWP are tracking this person and discovered this person is very interested in me. I'm like quite blown away. So they are now tracking people's online output. People should be very careful. People think that they can claim benefits and be online, but it's all visible, and that will be used in evidence against them. And one of the things I said to the whistleblower was, I've done a lot of stuff into invisible illnesses, and sometimes a person can be sick one day and well the next day, but that doesn't mean that they're actually like safe enough to employ, because you don't necessarily know whether they will be able to turn up because they may be sick. But that's not what they're going on. They're going on the volume of somebody's online output and whether they could actually be doing an online job. This is getting interesting. She wanted me to know it anyway. She said that she thought it was a good news lead for Wake Up. Yes, indeed. Thank you. Thank you, person anonymous. Heads up there. That is some scary stuff, says Vendetta. Indeed it is. Trevor said, wow, good for that whistleblower. Yeah. And, but, you know, obviously, it's DWP snooping on online activity. Oh, indeed. But I'm so glad I got to find out about it, because when I find out about it, that's when you find out about it, right? That's if you haven't heard about it before. And I doubt you have on that particular one. And as I say, the reason that she came to me was that she discovered that this person that they've been tracking has a fascination with me. And she turned out to be a Wake Up viewer. Anyway, very interesting. 1984 on steroids, says Marcuson. Indeed it is. Indeed it is. Right, I want to welcome in my next guest. Very interesting lady. Let me bring up my notes pertaining to her, because I don't want to start talking about Ofcom when I'm discussing with her. Here she is. Her name is Stephanie Davis. She is an inadvertent whistleblower. How are you, Stephanie?
Hi there. I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Really good to have you with us. Thank you for joining us. You've been interviewed by The Guardian. You've been interviewed by Channel 4, gave some mind-blowing interviews. And what's really interesting, this is regarding, obviously, Lucy Letby. And what's really interesting is I think that what you've done is you've given people an insight into the early stages of the investigation, which is very mind-blowing to people. And now you are of the mind that Lucy Letby has almost certainly suffered a miscarriage of justice. Her case should be referred for review to the Court of Appeal and almost certainly quashed. So let's go back to the beginning. First of all, you've been studying dead people for 2 decades?
Yeah, after I finished my master's in forensic behavioural science and a couple of bachelor degrees in forensic psychology and forensic science, I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I came across the job of a coroner's officer, and that was nearly 20 years ago. I was only going to do it for about a year, and then I thought, no, actually, I really like this job. There's something about it. I originally wanted to be a detective, but I was born deaf. My deafness is far too severe to ever be a police officer. So I had to find an alternative career for myself. So yeah, in February, it'll be 20 years.
Wow, amazing stuff. And you are, to all intents and purposes, in my mind, a whistleblower. You call yourself inadvertent in the same way as I call myself an accidental troublemaker. So I completely get that vibe where you're coming from. And you were involved in this case right at the start. Lucy Letby, of course, she is the former neonatal nurse, is convicted of murdering 7 babies and convicted of the attempted murder of a further 7. Huge counter attack has risen up about these convictions, really problematic. Tell us your role. What was your role at the beginning?
So you might hear a cat meowing. I've got a cat with me, so apologies to
Absolutely welcome. It's lovely to have you with us, and let the cats come in. They're very welcome.
So yes, I'd just been promoted to senior coroner's officer in May. Well, it was in April 2017, and then in May 2017, Cheshire Police received a letter from the Countess of Chester saying, please, can you investigate the spike in baby deaths? I was invited to a goal group meeting at police headquarters. I did not know what it was about. I found out that this letter had been received, and the consensus was amongst senior police officers that there was nothing to investigate. There was no evidence. There had been too long a time period since the alleged crimes had happened. So it was a case of, we haven't got anything to go on, so we're going to go back to the hospital and say there's nothing to investigate, we're not getting involved. The assistant chief constable turned to me at that point and said, before we go back to the hospital, we need to double check, are the causes of deaths for these babies sufficiently explained? So that was my task. And he said, can you go away? Can you review all the deaths between 2015 and 2016 of all babies at the Countess of Chester Hospital and report back tomorrow morning if they're explained or not? It was a reasonably straightforward exercise at the time, considering that they'd mostly made their mind up. So I thought, okay, well, I just need to check the cause of death. I just need to check the post-mortem reports and the circumstances of the deaths and see if there's anything there that troubles me or doesn't trouble me. So that evening, straight after that Gold Group meeting, I went back to my office. It was just after 4 o'clock in the afternoon because my team had gone home by then. Their working day finishes at 4. And I knew that where I was at the town hall building, it shut at 7. So I thought, right, okay, I've got less than 3 hours. I need to have a look at all of these deaths and report back. So I found that there were 13. And some of them had post-mortem examinations. Some of them, one of them had been subjected to a full inquest hearing, and a few of them had they'd been issued medical cause of death certificates by the doctor, so there were no post-mortems for those. My initial impression was they're all natural causes. There's nothing linking, and there weren't the same natural cause for all the deaths either. There were variations. And I thought, and I was mostly interested in those that had very detailed paediatric pathology, the post-mortems by paediatric pathologists. And because they have more detail, so they have the circumstances as reported to them by the coroner or the coroner's officer. And they do so many different types of testing. For paediatric pathology is completely different to your standard coronial post-mortem. Right. It's incredibly detailed. Their reports go to about 15 plus pages long. They do all sorts of different tests: microbiology, histology, toxicology, virology, loads of different types. And often we're saying to parents, it can take several months before we get a post-mortem report back. It will take a long time because they're so incredibly detailed. So I looked at these post-mortem reports of the babies, and especially the last baby, so O and P. And that's when I saw a couple, maybe red flags. I identified what were gaps. So, for example, for one of the babies, there's a description about the sequence of events that led to the death. But then there was a gap. And the pathologist, bearing in mind it was 8 years ago when I read these reports, and I was going through them really quickly because I only had limited time to look at them. But I remember that there was this, in the summary section, the pathologist has said, in the absence of any other information or evidence, I can only give the underlying cause of death as prematurity as leading to this. It was bleeding around the liver. And I thought, okay, that's a really strong thing to say, because that cause of death is come back through the process of elimination. And if you do that, that means that, you basically, it is almost like a guess, without any other strong information or evidence, I can only give prematurity as the cause of death. And I thought, he's gone through so much detail explaining this bleeding, the problems around the liver, and then there seems to be a gap. And then I'm certain I saw something similar in another post-mortem report. And that's when I thought, okay, the Countess of Chester are now offering new information or new evidence. So that must mean that these causes of death need to be revisited in consultation with this pathologist.
Right. Let me just say this as an outsider. When you said you only had 3 hours to review 13 deaths, that seemed like a very tall order. But my impression from you yesterday when we had a brief chat was it wasn't particularly. That was not necessarily so much out of the ordinary.
No, I don't think it was. I have to you know, I don't think it's no disrespect to the police. I think we all thought it was a very straightforward task, me included. And to be fair, I think I achieved the objective in that time period. Right. The only thing I didn't do was ideally, being a perfectionist, I would have written my conclusion on a Word document and then produce that as a complete package of a review, but I didn't have time. I only had time to do my spreadsheet. I didn't have time to print it off, so I just I emailed it to Paul Hughes after the second Gold Group meeting.
Tall order, but what was interesting was, even though you realised there were like missing pieces here, things just were not adding up for you. But your review was one of the main reasons, wasn't it, why police were ended up pursuing a deliberate harm of these babies? How did you feel when you discovered that?
So I did not think my review would have much of an impact. I thought it was, you know, for want of a better word, it was quite a superficial review because I didn't have much time. I couldn't make any further inquiries or phone any families or anything like that. I couldn't do anything like that. So I think it was a week or two later, Paul Hughes came to my office and he said, "Oh, by the way, the review you did, it was one of the main reasons we decided to investigate." And I was taken aback. I didn't think it had any impact. So yeah, I was surprised, but I didn't know at the time if the gaps were due to deliberate harm or wider systemic issues. I had no idea. I didn't see any obvious signs of deliberate harm, but Cheshire Police did not ask me to look for that, and that probably would not have been my role to do that. My role was to, in effect, interpret the post-mortem reports and the cause of death, interpret those for the police and say, this is what I think in terms of the cause of deaths being explained. And I concluded that no, I did not think they were sufficiently explained. There were gaps, there were missing jigsaw pieces.
And you expected the jury to find her not guilty, so much were the missing jigsaw. So how did you respond when she was found guilty in the first trial?
So I had absolutely nothing to do with Operation Hummingbird. As soon as I did my review, that was it. I was kept completely in the dark, which is fair enough. It was a police-led investigation. They didn't require input from the senior coroner's officer after that. And I'll be honest, I did not follow much of the trial until I saw on the news about these confession notes. And I thought, oh, because I had no idea what evidence had been found against Lucy Letby at that point. And I heard about these confession notes, and it's almost like, this is it. This is the proof that she's a murderer. And then I had lots of little red flags going off, and I have studied forensic psychology, and I thought, that does not prove she's a murderer. That's behavioural evidence. That's extremely subjective, and it's all about the context. And so when I looked a bit deeper, I saw that she'd also written that she's innocent. And I thought, this is somebody so troubled by what's happening that, you know, this is not a psychopath. A psychopath wouldn't even write that, you know. If it was somebody so highly intelligent that they're able to, you know, murder babies and get away with it for so long, then they would not then leave clues like that behind. That it's just a contradiction.
Yeah, it wasn't making sense. And I think that was really what was bothering you, wasn't it? The fact that things just were not adding up. And where you were coming from, your job was a very logical role, wasn't it? It was just about kind of separating fact from fiction. This is the reality of what's happened. And I saw the interview with you where you talked about how you reread the original report and you compared that with the amended causes of death. And you kind of alluded to that at the start of this conversation. But what was so different about it?
Yeah, so I actually had my review inadvertently returned to me when Cheshire Police returned my office items. So that's when I started to have a bit more of an interest in the case, because I'd not forgotten that I'd done the review, but I'd forgotten all the intricate details. So all the individual causes of death that were given originally. So I saw those, and then I saw the new cause of deaths, and they were so wildly different from what these very experienced paediatric pathologists had found. And I thought, hang on, air embolism and, you know, overfeeding and another method, although no deaths occurred by insulin, but another method identified was to do with insulin. And I thought, hang on, when you look at the circumstances of all the babies' deaths, you're like, how is that linked? I mean, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a pathologist, I'm not a neonatologist, but I am in effect an interpreter, and I have been investigating deaths for nearly 20 years, so I have a good mind for it. And I thought, what is the scientific basis for these new causes of deaths? And what did the original paediatric pathologists say? Did they say, oh, yes, you're right, it was an air embolism, actually? And, what was consultation done with those original professionals? And I don't think there was. So, when I had my review returned to me, I did reach out to the Thirlwall inquiry, because at that point I'd heard what the verdict was. It was guilty. I thought, well, okay, maybe there was other evidence that the media have not televised that I'm not aware of, so maybe this is genuine, she is a murderer. So when I wrote my Thirlwall statement, I did allude to the fact that, these were murders. But what gave me the doubts was when I saw the December press conference arranged by the new defence barrister, Mark MacDonald, and then the subsequent February press conference. And with the December press conference, there was discussion about Baby O and about a procedure taking place. Now, we don't know what's caused the death of Baby O in terms of this procedure, whether it's contributed or whether something else had caused the death and the procedure was just a failed attempt at resuscitation. We don't know. That's open to debate. But what concerned me was that this procedure was not reported to the coroner. And I had my review, and I thought, no, this reporting doctor has not referred this procedure to the coroner at all. And okay, again, that's open to interpretation. So the reporting doctor may not have been aware of the procedure. The reporting doctor may have thought it's had absolutely no bearing because something else caused the collapse of this baby. So, there could be an innocent reason to why, but fundamentally, that procedure drew back blood, and that is a red flag for a procedure going wrong. So it should have been reported to the coroner. And I thought, if that's not been reported, what else has not been reported?
Right. Sorry, I'm just going to say, but that's substantial, because that involves literally one of the babies that was used to convict her. So that's substantial. If there's information like that has been whatever, withheld, mislaid, misplaced, whatever happened to it, but it didn't make it to the place where it needed to be assessed, Stephanie. That's significant.
Exactly. And if you remember that Dr. Darry Evans, the main prosecution expert,
yes,
he was it was Baby O's case. That was the one within 10 minutes he said this is deliberate harm. So it is a very crucial case. It was the first one where he said that's deliberate harm. So when we have deaths reported to us, the coroner's officer produces a summary. The coroner will authorise a post-mortem examination, and then that is sent to the paediatric pathologist. Now, the paediatric pathologist will have had the medical records as well when he did the post-mortem on Baby O, but he would not have had this procedure highlighted. So he wasn't fully informed. So the coroner was not fully informed. The paediatric pathologist was not fully informed. So how could they give a true account as to the cause of death of Baby O? And then years later, you get an expert saying within 10 minutes over a cup of coffee, it's deliberate harm. You're looking at murder.
It's a huge leap. It's a massive leap.
My concern is, had there been an explanation for Baby O, I may not have said there are gaps here. I may well have come back and concluded to the police. They're all explained. It's either natural causes or, in one case, potentially a procedure has contributed. But that may have ended it, and at least my review would not have contributed to what I believe is one of the worst miscarriages of justice of our times.
Oh, that's quite something to carry, isn't it? It's interesting. You referred to her new defence team led by Mark MacDonald, and obviously the panel gave a press conference in February. Dr. Xu Li, who's leading it and whose own research was actually used in part to convict her. But he said that we did not find any murders in all cases due to natural causes or bad medical care. So it is worrying, as you say, if they've missed this piece of information that you're referring to, what else has been missed? You're in no doubt this is a miscarriage of justice. Is she a scapegoat, do you think?
Potentially. That's one thing I'm not sure about, because I think if there was a conspiracy, like, let's set up a nurse, we don't want anyone to look at our own failings, let's set up a nurse. But why invite all that scrutiny by a police force? I think it could be a case of little seeds were planted and then they were watered over time, and then confirmation bias is set in, and then it is probably exacerbated by the upheld grievance that Lucy Letby put against her accusers, and she was successful. So and then I think it got to a point where her main accusers were convinced that this is the person that's doing it. I'm not sure that they have that awareness into themselves and realizing that it could be partly to do with them. That's why they had this spike in deaths. So I'm on the fence about that. I do think now it's looking like it, but I don't think it was an intentional conspiracy from the outset. Let's blame this on a nurse. I think it's a seed that is then grown arms and legs.
It snowballs, doesn't it? It's like the story becomes real right in front of your eyes. I get that. Cheshire Police are not happy with you. You no longer work for them. They've issued statements that seek to undermine you, as if you were just somebody who was like hanging around the office. What's the situation with Cheshire Police?
So I think some people may say, oh, she's got a grudge against the police, this is why she's speaking out. But when I wrote my thorough inquiry statement, I actually referred to the fact that these were murders. So if I had an axe to grind with Cheshire Police, I would have blindly said from the outset, they're wrong. They are wrong about everything. But it's all about what the evidence shows, and it's only when the evidence was showing that Lucy Letby is looking to be innocent, that's when I thought I have to speak out. And I think by the time I did that, my employment had already ended with Cheshire Police, and I'd already been through a messy employment tribunal, which I then withdrew from because it was taking a toll on my health. But essentially, you refer to the fact I'm an inadvertent whistleblower. That is what I refer to myself as. And it's to do with another case, or a couple of cases. We won't talk about them today, but I raised concerns, very serious concerns, that the police have made mistakes in these historic death investigations. And instead of investigating my concerns, they turned on me. And then I lost my job. And then I was put on the College of Policing barred list as a farewell gift. But I'm passionate about what I do. I now consult on complex cases. I'm still, increasing my learning. I'm passionate about, death investigation, and also about righting those wrongs in terms of miscarriages of justice. So there's been a few cases I've now reviewed since my employment ended with Cheshire Police.
When I first started looking into this case, I got people emailing me saying, do you not care about the parents? They're already grieving. What is wrong with you? The reason that I'm taking the position I am is because I care very much about the parents, and because the parents deserve to know the truth. Have you been attacked in the same way?
I've seen reference, not to me personally, but I'm sure people are saying, why is she doing this? Think of the parents. But, if I think about back to my review, that contributed to Operation Hummingbird taking off the ground. And then, the parents were all then told your babies have been murdered, or there's been an attempt to murder on your baby. That is awful. They've gone through so much. They've lost their baby, or their baby may have had life-changing injuries, one's a better term. And they've had to come to terms with that. Then they get the police knocking on their door saying, we think your baby was murdered. They've had to come to terms with that. And then they've had the trial, which has taken forever to come to trial. And then it was like 10 months. And then you have people, professionals, popping up all over the place saying this is not a safe conviction. It looks like she's innocent. they're going through hell. They're going through absolute hell.
Terrible.
But to keep an innocent person in prison does not resolve that hell. It doesn't. They deserve the truth. And as in my career, I mean, with Cheshire Police alone, I work for 2 different police forces, but with Cheshire Police alone, I investigated over 5,000 deaths. Wow. And that's over 5,000 families I've spoken to, helping them to understand how their loved one died. And so if I could have the opportunity to speak to those parents, I would love to. I know that Cheshire Police would probably block that from happening, but I would love to speak to them to try and help them to understand what the truth could actually be. I'd be happy to talk to them, but I know that their lawyers and Cheshire Police will probably ban them from doing that. So, but this is thinking of them, but yes, the hell is continuing for them, and that is awful. But it should never have got to this stage.
No, it shouldn't. A number of people are very excited and looking forward to you coming on, including one viewer, Stuart Reynolds. Good morning to you, Stuart. Stuart was wrote in about a complaint that he'd made to Panorama, in which he references you in a good way about you coming out, speaking out. Thank you, Stuart. I've read through this. Just going to read it briefly. I'm writing briefly with some thoughts on the recent Panorama programme. I've also appended a copy of a complaint to the BBC, which includes a reference to Stephanie Davis. It is encouraging that she is speaking out, and I'm looking forward to her appearance on your show. And obviously, Panorama, they quoted fake stats, very much a media narrative taking place. I'll just read you what the complaint says about you, if I can just find it here. The senior coroner's officer working on the case, Stephanie Davis, has confirmed that hospital doctors did not report the needle procedure, and that had this been known, it may have had major significance for the police investigation. Having reviewed other information that has emerged, she has written to the Cheshire coroner stating she is extremely concerned that the convictions are wholly unsafe. Good on you, Stuart. I think a lot of people have made complaints to the BBC. Have you seen that BBC Panorama, Stephanie?
Yes, I have. It's very concerning that misinformation was allowed to be broadcast. It's very, very concerning because it calls into question the impartiality of those that did that programme. So it's not good, and this is the problem. There's a lot of misinformation, and this misinformation was allowed to be treated as fact in a court, you know. So, but essentially, I think the coincidences, they're all they're interpretations of behavioural evidence. It's not tangible evidence that, in my opinion, convicted Lucy Letby. You know, where's the tangible evidence? And there are so many. I think it's a multifactorial failing, but Panorama, they certainly did not help. If anything, they may have helped, you know, demonstrate the case against Lucy Letby is not safe. So they may have helped in that sense, but you'd expect a documentary to be incredibly impartial and to do their fact checking first. So that was disappointing.
Especially for the size of the organisation, the sheer volume of people that they have working on one show, right? There's one person working on my show and I fact check until I fall over the night before, right? But they will have probably a team of 20 people fact checking. That doesn't even include legal. So for that to be allowed to happen was quite astonishing. So where now, really? There's loads of comments. People are talking about the dodgy plumbing in the hospital. We've heard about that, haven't we? Do you have anything to say about that?
Well, it's a factor that could have contributed to systemic issues, and you know, the final prosecution case, it was very black and white, dichotomous. You know, it's like one or the other, but there are lots of contributing factors, and that is one of them. You know, the issues with the bacteria. You know, there's so many other problems that don't seem to have been taken into account at the trial. So.
It really seems to me, I've been a journalist for 3 decades, an investigative journalist for, 15 years. And it really seems to me that it was almost in its own way, and I'm not suggesting corruption here, but almost a foregone conclusion. It was like, this is how we address this. This is the problem we're dealing with. And it all comes down to one person. So obviously now we're at the CCRC stage. I think Mark MacDonald said that in his 26 years of being a barrister, he had never submitted so much evidence to the CCRC. Do you think this is getting referred to the Court of Appeal, Stephanie?
I think it should. But I think even if it does get to the Court of Appeal, there's a new battle there as well. And it's the implications. So if Lucy Letby's convictions are overturned, then it shines a light on those that put her in prison. Right. So the CPS, the doctors, Cheshire Police, it shines a light on all of them, and it does cast it raises questions on their ability to deal with a case of this kind. So it's a landmark case anyway. So, and it could well be that there are other miscarriages of justice right. that needs to be looked at. It opens a massive can of worms, and it's similar to the cases that I lost my job over. If I was to be proved right about those cases, it opens a massive can of worms, and it calls into question all the deaths that Cheshire Police have investigated in the past. So they can't risk that happening. So let's get rid of the troublemaker rather than look at the actual concerns. So and I do worry that it's too much of a troublemaker if they were to overturn the convictions. But it's about doing what's right, and if we can learn, as the UK, we can learn. Let's do better next time. Let's learn. If mistakes have been made, they're multifactorial. We can't blame, one organisation or one individual for. Right. It's multifactorial.
One feeds into another. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You've been an absolute brilliant guest. Let me read you some of the comments for you, Levis. Aquaboy says, Stephanie is a brilliant guest. Stephen says, yes, a great guest. Greg says, agreed. Fred said, yes, she seems well-researched and very articulate. And DJ Markson says, Genie is out of the bottle and it's not going back in. Stephanie, I want to thank you so much for being prepared to speak out. It's never easy. Yes, thank you, Trevor. Fantastic and articulate guest. Brave and honest, says Ian. Lots of people saying lots of wonderful things about you, and well-deserved, I should say. Everybody, this is Stephanie Davis, an inadvertent whistleblower. Yeah. However they come, may they come. Wonderful to have you with us. Take good care of yourself. Enjoy your bank holiday.
You too. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Wonderful. Thank you, Stephanie. Well, absolutely brilliant. Thank you for all your wonderful comments. Bob said, thank you, Stephanie. Very articulate. She got it right. What have I got here? Thank you, Stephanie. Couldn't agree more with everyone else's comments, said Vendetta. It's a terrible situation. It is a terrible situation. Really, it is horrible. Right. Okay. What are we going to talk about? I'm going to briefly refer to Candace Owens. Thank you. Sheer volume of people who have sent me a clip of Candace Owens mentioning me is quite staggering. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you very much. And we talked about Candace Owens recently, obviously American podcaster, currently being sued by the Macrons because she has said, she alleges, amongst other things, that the First Lady of France is in fact the first dude. And so I think all of that's really quite interesting, but they decided to sue her. But Macron decided to speak out last week, and he was extensively quoted in the New York Post, and he's not a happy bunny. He said, and I quote, that Candace Owens is a liar who knew very well that she was spreading false information about his wife, Bridget, being born male. He said they're talking about the identity of the First Lady of France, of a wife, a mother and grandmother. It's a matter of defending my honor. He said that he was compelled to take legal action due to Owens' considerable reach in the US and beyond. He said this has become such a big issue in the United States that we had to respond. He said it's a question of having the truth respected. It was interesting that throughout it, he didn't actually refer to her by name, which now here's the thing, right? Now, I don't know if Candace Owens has been through a legal system situation before, right? Having spent 5 years in the High Court myself, I can tell you that her approach is extremely interesting. And I'd say that because I'm not sure whether it's an ignorance of the judicial system and how it works, or a desire to milk this scandal for all it's worth, or a combination of both of them. But one thing I do know is Candace is still saying lots about this lawsuit, and much of it is to ridicule the Macrons. It's a joke to her. When she said on her podcast that he hadn't mentioned her name, she brought out a clip from Destiny's Child, Say My Name, right? Now, it may be a joke to her for a number of reasons, right? But let's say all of this is actually a truly legit lawsuit, that they aren't but all pawns of the globalist establishment that has been sent to put the rest of us in order and stop us saying certain things on the internet. But let's just say that this is a legit lawsuit. She will have to answer to a judge. Then she's in some hot water, because her action since the lawsuit will be really problematic in court. Some of her bravado podcasts may come back to seriously haunt her. So I just have to wonder whether this is her first lawsuit. And if it is, then I do think that she could do with some decent advice. And that is just be incredibly careful what you're saying, because at this moment in time, it will all be used against you, all of it. And I'm not sure that she fully realizes that. Not sure at all. But it would appear, because I thought that it was going to get kicked out, right? Because it's like it's set up it's in Delaware, even though they're in France. So I thought it might get kicked out on those grounds. I also thought it was very interesting that they decided to go through with it, because when you do a lawsuit like that, the disclosures that will come from it will be immense. We will, now, because it's a civil claim, you won't ultimately know the answer of whether Brigitte is a man or woman by the end of it, by the way. But it will be determined to come down on the side of kind of like probability one way or another. There's a lower degree of proof needed for a civil claim, obviously, than a criminal case. But all of it is very, very interesting. And thank you. Honestly, you don't need to send me in more clips of Candace Owens mentioning me. But thank you. I appreciate it. Truly, I do. Truly, truly, I do. And thank you to the response, by the way. Let me just bring in this. Oops, image file. Where are you? Thank you to the response to Friday's deep dive about Max Clifford. Okay, within 10 minutes of finishing, oops, that's not what I want to do. Let me, there we go. Within 10 minutes of finishing the live stream, YouTube had blocked the video worldwide at the request of Simon Cowell and ITV. Well, obviously not necessarily personally Simon Cowell, but his company and ITV, who own the clip, that they wanted to block. Now, I've never had this happen before. It's so extreme. YouTube is largely made up of people using other people's footage, be that reaction videos or news shows, and it's an extreme action to block a 2-hour video based on a clip that was less than 10 seconds. Anyway, I edited it out and it went back online. But as many people said to me, somebody is scared and likely. I talked about Max Clifford being a serial predator, protecting serial predators, some of them still walking around. And a wonderful response. And some people said, why didn't you include this person? That was his client. Why didn't you include that person? Well, the easy and simple answer to that is I didn't include his client list as such because it was so expansive, and I primarily focused on the clients where it showed who he really was and what his character was. And one of the people that actually, let me read you some comments. Thank you very much. Maria Benucci said, I love this deep dive journalism, Sonia. It feels like you're getting nearly the whole story. There will always be things these predators manage to keep hidden, but you do a great job of getting into the cracks and dragging out the facts. Thank you. I appreciate that. And Aaliyah is a new subscriber. Thank you so much. Saying these monsters need exposing. Have been watching a certain person's rise to fame and watched many of his shows with my children. It's sickening how he presents himself to the world, and hope he is exposed soon. I think we might know who Aaliyah is referring to. The world is beginning to wake up. Indeed it is, which is absolutely wonderful. And Vivian Young, good morning to you, Vivian, said, great listening, but you surprised me not mentioning Jade Goody at all. Fair point. Jade Goody. And I didn't mention Jade Goody just because, as I say, there were a whole load of his clients that I just thought this is going to take us into 3 hours if I start doing a breakdown of his clients. Now, Jade Goody, actually, I understand why you said that. So Jade Goody, one of the reasons I didn't mention Jade Goody was because for our overseas viewers, they might not necessarily know who Jade Goody was. She was very much a tabloid manufactured individual. But she was somebody who very sadly had 2 young sons and ultimately died of cancer. And Max Clifford represented her. So I take your point, Vivian, but can you see why I chose not to? And the other one that was mentioned to me, and I think that was by Craig Campbell, was Robert Murat. Robert Murat, again, I didn't mention him just because that's associated with the McCann case. And I just felt it's going to take us down an avenue that is not part of this story. But yeah, briefly, Max Clifford represented Robert Murat when he was being defamed by the British newspapers. And as I said, I didn't include all of Max Clifford's clients because I would have been here all day. So I worked with the ones that I thought best exemplified how he was prepared to represent anyone for money, really. But thank you. The response, again, always very heartening. And I appreciate you very, very, very much. Thank you. Right. Your shout. This is an interesting story. Let me just check I've got to the top of this. Right. Your shout is really where you, our viewers, write into me about things that are interesting me and ask me to comment on it or have a look at it or whatever. And let's start. This one is entitled Double Standards, Women Attacking Men. Hi, Sonia. Kurt, one of your American viewers here. Love Wake Up. Thank you. I wondered your thoughts on domestic violence against men. I ask because I don't know if you are aware of Sha'Carri Richardson. She's an Olympic athlete who was caught pushing and shoving her boyfriend in an airport and then lied that he was the aggressor. Have you seen it? And if you have, what do you think? Lots of love from this side of the Atlantic, Kurt. Yes, Kurt, I have seen it. And if you hadn't sent me this email, I probably would have commented on it anyway, because it appalled me so much. Let me just bring up some of these images. And I think whether you know who Sha'Carri Richardson is or not, the story still stands. And that is do we still apply double standards when it comes to female aggression against males? And I think the answer absolutely has to be yes, because so in response to you, Kurt, I want to talk about this because it shows how different people perceive female violence and aggression to how we perceive male violence and aggression. So what happened was Sha'Carri Richardson was filmed in an airport at the beginning. Let me see if I've got the details here. She was filmed. Yeah, here we go. She was filmed in the Seattle Tacoma International Airport on July the 27th this year. And I'm not going to play the video because the video does show signs of violence and aggression. And I probably get into more trouble on YouTube if I do that. So I'm not going to risk that. But there is some of it in this image that I've put up here. The top picture is of her, and she's pushing him around, and she won't leave the poor sod alone. And it's her boyfriend, Christian Coleman, who is also an Olympic athlete. And she essentially pushed him for, I don't know, maybe a period of what we saw on the cameras, maybe 1 or 2 minutes, but she was really aggressive. She was in his face. She was pushing him, shoving him, whacking him into walls, doing all this kind of stuff. And then there was a video that followed afterwards where they had caught her on the airport cameras, and she immediately played the victim and just threw him under the bus. She was like, oh, I'm Sha'Carri Richardson, and like, oh yeah, I have no problem showing you my identity. I'm Sha'Carri Richardson, because I'm sure that in some places Sha'Carri Richardson opened some doors. Now, before I get onto this, right, first of all, I just want to say that I was upset by this because I've actually been a Sha'Carri Richardson fan. I have loved Sha'Carri Richardson. Sorry about that bit of hair sticking out there. I've loved Sha'Carri Richardson. And when I was significantly younger at school, rather, I used to love racing, and 100 meters was my thing, which is her thing. And because it's like a short, sharp burst, I beat most of my opponents when I was at school, and I loved it. So I've appreciated her speed and finesse as a track star. She is an absolute dream to watch running. This is a woman who has set many records, including running the 100 meters in 10 seconds, which is phenomenal. At one stage, she became the 6th fastest woman of all time in history. And on top of that, I was aware that she'd had a very difficult start. She was raised by her grandmother and her aunt. There was an absence of parents around her, and I supported her rise to fame through finding something she excelled at. All of that was absolutely wonderful. She's often been compared to Florence Griffiths Joyner. I don't know if you remember her. Again, another track star. And because Sha'Carri, like Florence Griffiths Joyner, loved the imagery of long nails, colourful hair on the track, and many people saw her as a hero. A number of things have been named after Sha'Carri Richardson, including a track which was renamed the Sha'Carri Richardson Track. And November the 10th, 2023 was declared Sha'Carri Richardson Day in Dallas, Texas. She is the American dream through and through. She's come from little, she's made good through sheer hard work and talent. All of that is absolutely fantastic. What isn't absolutely fantastic is seeing her committing public domestic violence against her male boyfriend. She's bisexual. She had her long-term relationship before was with a woman, but that is not acceptable. It is not okay. And so in answer to your email, Kurt, I was absolutely appalled by it. I'm also appalled at the way that she responded. He immediately sought to protect her when the police approached them. She was like, have you seen the video of him doing that to me? I don't believe that happened. She then came out with an apology. Basically, I'm a bad girl and I'm trying to do better and all of that. But the reality is, Kurt, that if a man, and also, by the way, if she's behaving that abysmally, if you only have to watch the video and you see how aggressive and violent she is with that man. And it went on rather a long time, but I'm in no doubt whatsoever. If it was the other way around, if Christian Coleman was caught pushing her in an open space, and what goes on in private, she does that in public, right? But if Christian Coleman was caught in the same way, pushing and shoving her and whacking her into walls and grabbing her, he would be losing endorsements by now. She's continued. Everything has continued on. She's carried on in this kind of bravado way, a social media post. My truth will change history, so leave me be. I'm actually appalled by her, absolutely appalled. She was arrested and charged, but Coleman declined to charge, which is quite common when males are subjected to violence at the hands of women. There is still an issue in our society about it being taboo. Because obviously, in terms of our physique, men are stronger than us. But that doesn't mean women aren't violent or abusive, and many are. And well, some are, let's just say. I'm not into cancel culture in any way, by the way. I just don't like the hypocrisy that if that had been a man caught doing that to her, honestly, they've lost all their endorsements. They wouldn't be running track. She's carried on. She's absolutely carried on. Even though she's been struggling this year, she's not up to form. She's absolutely not up to form. But she's just on the podium the other night in Brussels. So she's carried on as per. And so, Kurt, in answer to your question, I'm absolutely appalled, and I think it's absolutely wrong. It's just wrong. If you're going to hurt people, you have to be held to account for it, regardless of your sex. And that's my position on it. Right. To continue with your shout, I referred to Emma Beasley at the start. Emma is a viewer who wrote into me and talking about the protests that are happening around the UK, and some of them are in response to very serious concerns about predators who are being housed in the UK. As I say, we have enough of our own crims, we have enough of our own predators. We don't need to be importing them. We absolutely don't. Anyway, Emma wrote in and said, "Hi, Sonia, I really want to bring awareness to what's going on within my local council. Within 18 days in June, July this year, we had 3 serious incidents in the L30 postcode alone. Men watching children in the park from trees. They were positioned opposite a primary school. A few days later, a man is walking around at 8 a.m. waving a knife, was found with a second one, and then a stabbing where they turned on each other. And there were some public meetings about it in the area. The police and the councillors were asked questions, and we got told to wait for answers. But what they did tell, what they did tell, they have no changed. I don't know what that means, not changed. Fast forward, we had a council meeting in Southport where the meeting turned into chaos, with councillors walking out for their own safety as they wouldn't answer questions that had already been approved. And Emma says, there is so much more to the story. I have people willing to talk and give you information from the resident groups who go to all meetings. It's at the point where women and children aren't safe." This was reported in the Liverpool Echo. Let's just see where that is. Here it is. So really, Emma is telling us something that we've heard before from people like Raja Mia, Maggie Oliver, a number of other people. And that is, there is a real problem when you want to raise up concerns. Now, I don't know whether Emma is talking in reference to migrants here, but she is talking about male aggression and male violence that isn't being taken seriously. And what she says is, please, can you at least look into it? They can't keep covering it up. Indeed, they can't. Have there been any arrests, Emma? Please get back in touch with me. Any charges? Because people are walking around with knives, right? It's illegal. You can't be doing that. And I am deeply concerned about the society that we are in now. We know that knife crime has increased exponentially throughout the UK. It's not just in London, it's throughout the UK. So really, really problematic. So Emma, I echo your concerns. They don't appear to be taking it seriously. And the full video of the council meeting is absolutely insane. It's just, it's chaotic. And I think councils are really struggling to come to terms with the fact that they have failed women and children and other men, because other men are also getting, attacked as well. So there's an all-round failure, and we need to take account of it. So there is clearly a problem. I want to move on to Kay, anonymous, and interesting. Hi, Sonia. I was listening to the radio this morning and caught very briefly a conversation between the radio presenter and the author of a new biography of Edward Heath. They briefly mentioned that the negative claims made against the former Prime Minister, presumably the P word, had been debunked. And what Kay, anonymous, wants to know is, how have these claims been debunked? How are we to know what to believe? I know you are extremely busy, so I don't expect a reply email, but perhaps you can discuss this on one of your future podcasts. Well, let's discuss it now. Let's bring in an image of Edward Heath, obviously former British Prime Minister, took us in to the European single market. Now, the reality is the claims have not been debunked. That is a lie. Police said that if Heath was still alive, they would have interviewed him under caution in relation to 7 out of the 42 allegations that were made against him. And Chief Constable Mike Veal, who ran the Wiltshire police investigation into Edward Heath, Operation Conifer, went through a type of hell when he announced his investigation. He was attacked by the establishment. And I cover this much more extensively, Kay, in my film Paedophiles in Parliament. And I talk about the journalists and politicians who wanted it shut down. They were like, this is absolutely outrageous. You're, dragging a dead man through the mud and everything. Maybe the problem is that it would have also implicated people who were still alive. And Operation Conifer, if you're not familiar, was launched by Wiltshire Police. And there was a great deal of work done into it. It was closed in March 2017. It cost a reported 1.5 million over 2 years. And they said that they were unable to find corroborating evidence about the allegations, but there was enough to have interviewed him if he was still alive. And then, of course, into the Edward Heath story was injected one Carl Beach. Carl Beach was put out by Xaro News, which I was extremely critical of in Paedophiles in Parliament. They were a news organisation that was essentially set up just before the Jimmy Savile revelations, and they cashed in big time. And what they were doing, it was very little due diligence taking place. It was really problematic. They were doing interviews with people and they were just putting them straight out there. And as a journalist, I was like, wait a sec, you can't just be doing that. And Carl Beach was one of them, and they called him Nick at the time, and he said that he had been abused by Edward Heath. And I think that Carl Beach was really very, very useful in all of this. Carl Beach, and what ultimately happened to him, and that was he was arrested, he was charged over child abuse offences in January 2019. He pleaded guilty. They said that he'd fabricated allegations against Heath and other prominent politicians, including Leon Britton. And he was sentenced in July 2019 to 80 years in prison. And as a journalist, I can tell you that as soon as he was sentenced, the whole issue of, is there any paedophilia in the establishment, shut down in the media. I worked at the time for ITN, and my job was to bring in these kind of outside stories. I worked extensively with ITN about paedophile allegations in the British Parliament. And as soon as Carl Beach was sentenced, it was a done deal. Now, in that respect, you can see why many people feel that, he was kind of like, he was a useful idiot, perhaps. And I don't ultimately know the full or true story of Carl Beach, but I never trusted what he had to say, simply because what he had to say was put out, and it was just put out bang. And then it was put out far and wide. It was in Australia, over all tabloid newspapers, over all newspapers, over the TV. And I just felt, this is a huge amount of information from somebody where I feel not a great deal of due diligence has been done into his history. And he served to put it all to bed. Again, and I could see what was coming. I made Paedophiles in Parliament in 2018. It was absolutely evident to me that all of the allegations of all the paedophile allegations of establishment abuse had rarely been looked into. Some cases have, but rarely. And it was a problem. And that's really why I made Paedophiles in Parliament. So yes, in answer to your question, anonymous viewer, the claims have not been debunked. That's a lie. But of course, what do we expect from BBC Radio? What do we expect? Briefly, response to Paul Burgess last week, pros and cons. Thomas, who had suggested Paul Burgess, of course, came in and the live chat was a bin fire. I can tell you that officially. So just a reminder of Paul Burgess, if you don't remember who he is, but he came in because he basically believes that chemtrails is bunkum, although he does absolutely accept that geoengineering is taking place and there have been incidents. And Thomas had been the one who had suggested Paul Burgess. And Thomas said, I've watched this section with yourself and Paul twice already. Thank you. You were very fair. And I thought the questions from your followers were really excellent too. I must be honest and say that I believe Paul is right, but it was a fantastic discussion, whichever one's position. Thanks again, Thomas. And thank you, Thomas, for suggesting it. And conversely, opposing Thomas is John from Norwich, who said, hi, Sonia. I confess I had to fast forward most of your debate with guest Paul Burgess, as I was finding his explanation for aeroplane trails exasperating. People like myself wouldn't come out well in a debate with Paul. He has a scientific background and is probably a lot more clever than me. Not necessarily. But here's the thing. I particularly noticed this during a convid. Professionals, intellects and scientists often fail to see the wood from the trees. They're so deep into their data that it blinds them from seeing the bleeding obvious. And I think this is an interesting point made. Could it be that we've reached a point where many have lost the simple ability to make straightforward judgments based on what we see and hear? I think it could be in some respects. If a brick is on the ground in front of you, then it's a brick. We don't need to have a debate about it, nor an expert to tell us it might be something else. The best thing anyone can trust is their own eyes, ears, and intuition. And I think and he goes on to say, John goes on to say, I'm not here to ridicule Paul. And no, he has also made some good observations on the CO2 nonsense, which most of your viewers will agree with him on. But perhaps someone like Matt Lamman was reticent to do the debate because he already knew that you can't affect someone's viewpoint when they refuse to see what's in front of them. And I think that's a fair point. And John has done what my viewers often do, and that is he sent in some imagery. Here we go. And John says, attached are a few photos, examples taken from my home, including a chemtrail and a contrail side by side. They are two different things. I agree with you, John. No, you don't need to, no argument here. But I thought it was interesting and I very much enjoyed Paul being involved. And this is lovely. This is very lovely. Lovely Peter Folder, I think, is in our comments today. Good morning to you, Peter. Peter sent a beautiful image of where he likes to get away from it all. Let me just find it. It's lovely, and I need to find it. What have I done with your image, Peter? What have I done with your image? Let me just find it here, because I want you to send me in your images of where you like to get away from it all, and why not, indeed. Here we go. Here's Peter's chill out. This is absolutely beautiful. This is rocket. Peter, where is this? Desktop. There we go. And there it is. Look at that. This is a picture of the river near where I live, where I go to rewind. I get you. And this is absolutely beautiful. I mean, I could spend hours sitting there. I love that. I love just kind of staring off into the middle distance and losing myself. This is absolutely beautiful. So please feel free to, it's a lovely view, Stephen. Isn't it, Satanto, isn't it stunning? Absolutely lovely hue, says Vendetta. Absolutely beautiful. Clear sky, beautiful, says Jacqueline. Well noted. It's my paradise too. You can't beat English countryside in summertime. I agree. It's absolutely glorious. Absolutely glorious. And in fact, talking about what you can't beat, this is where I also go to chill. I did this video. Let me just find it. And it's so gorgeous. I love going into my local park, as many people know about me. Oops, if I can find it. Let me, have I lost it? Don't tell me I've lost it. Don't tell me I've lost it. Let me just get that Royal Mail film out there that I want to comment briefly on. Here we go. Baby deer. Check out these beautiful baby deer that I filmed at the end of last week. Look at them. They're all waiting in a row. They're following after the one at the front. Look at them. You can hear my dog panting, by the way. Look at them. They are actually checking us out. And it's interesting because even in a situation like this, there is a leader. They are waiting behind that white one at the front. Some interesting different colors on these little babies. But that's where I go to relax. So do feel free to send me brief video clips or images of where you go to relax. I think we need to learn, don't we, about relaxing again. And yes, the Blue Nomad is wishing happy birthday, Teresa at the Wild Way. Happy birthday. Happy birthday indeed. Here in Ayrshire, very heavy grey clouds, but it never rains. What? Never rains, Jacqueline? Are you sure about that? We get deer here as well. Do you, Shug? Where are you, mate? Look at them. They're just adorable. I just love them. And they were checking me out, and it was just absolutely lovely. And so that's where I go to relax. So thank you, Peter, for sending us that beautiful, beautiful image. Absolutely wonderful. What else to say? Thank you as ever to our wonderful, wonderful donators. You are absolute stars. Thank you to Ulrich Curry. Thank you to Valerie, who also, wonderful Valerie, also sends me books. I have so many books to get through. Look at this, When Mackenzie Comes to Town, The Secret World of Stephen Ward. Very interesting stuff there. Thank you to Jade T. Thank you to Hound Dog Shop. Thank you to Helen O'Carroll. And as always, thank you to my wonderful, wonderful Patreons. You are amazing. I am changing my Patreon this week, so look out for news of that. And I was just checking out some of the people from the Super Chat from last week, and you were absolute stars. Daniel Krause, Becky Hall, Catherine Hutton, Natasha, Swiss Miss, Sticky Marks, Synchronized Souls, Tweety Pie, and Fred Withrow. And I saw again that Becky Hall also gave some Super Chat this morning. Thank you so much. I appreciate you all. You people are amazing. Absolutely wonderful. Thank you. Also, I want to say hello to Joel in New Zealand. And Joel is an old mate, actually. And I hear via another mate that he watches Wake Up, which is absolutely wonderful. I want to briefly tell you about Joel. Joel was busy mates with a guy called Valentine. And I adored them both. And I was around them during my kind of hip hop era where a white female was quite unusual in many key respects. And they kind of acted like my security. And so it was me, little small white woman, two big black guys, and we'd go to places together. And Joel, I want you to know that you always made me feel safe in those environments. And that really, really touches me, even these decades later, to know that I had you guys have my back. And some of those environments were not very welcoming to me, shall we say. But to know that you two guys have my back really touches my heart. So thank you all. You're amazing. Thank you. And thank you, Joel. Absolutely wonderful. And quickly, let me show you this. My daughter brought this to my attention. I think this is concerning. And does anybody in the chat know what this is about? Check this out, right? This is the Royal Mail postbox. Postbox, Royal Mail. Now sealed up because, look at that, out of service, automated system coming soon. Really? Wow. What is that? So a Royal Mail postbox, right? They've been around forever. It's actually a traditional part of England. We, know it very well, just like the red phone boxes used to be. And now they're sealing it up and out of service, automated system coming soon. What does that mean? What does that mean? I don't know what that means. And thank you, Bob. Bob, my first time seeing you live. Hope to catch it again when insomnia strikes. Thanks. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Paul says Boris would mistake it as a Muslim woman. Do you remember that? Oh, my God, when Boris Johnson described Muslim women as, what was they say, like letterboxes or something. What the hell is that, says Stephen? Is that the service where you can drop off parcels instead? I don't know. I'm confused. Thanks, Merv. appreciate that design looks like a wall, doesn't it? I don't know what it means. They want to remove anything to do with England. Now that I think is very true. They want to make us some kind of like, you know, where everything is the same wherever you go. Anything that is uniquely us, they want to get rid of. We are now past 11 o'clock and I want to talk very briefly. Let's remove this. My daughter is like a little cub reporter for me. She's always spotting things out and about, which is absolutely wonderful. It's outside post boxes. Where is this? This is in Teddington, southwest London. Right. Yes, Hydra Violet. I do think it is part of destroying our national identity. I think there's some truth in that. I genuinely do. Right, let's bring you on to the last point. And that is the courage to be disliked, right? And so I am very well aware that a book that was first published in 2013 by two Chinese authors, Fumitaki Koga and Ichiro Kishimi, they published this book, The Courage to be Disliked, 2013, but it's kind of resurfaced on like TikTok and all social media and everything. And it's based on Alfred Adler, who was an Austrian, he was a medical doctor. He was also a psychotherapist, and he was a founder of the School of Individual Psychotherapy. And his emphasis was on the importance of feelings of belonging. He didn't necessarily subscribe to kind of like the Freudian idea or any of the, or Jung or any of those things to do with like trauma or any of those things. He sort of believed that your life is not based on past trauma and how you feel about it. And he also believed that however you feel about your past can be stopped at any moment with the right attitude. So that is the basis for The Courage to be Disliked. But it's now, you know, blown up again. It's, you know, been republished, and I think it's very interesting. And MT says, I've never given a flying fig if people don't like me. And Shug echoes the same thing. And I think one of the first people that I really recognized, and I didn't necessarily like her, she was actually my opponent on TV, but one of the first people that I really recognized, who actually, even though I disagreed with almost everything she said, but I recognized that she had a courage to her, that she didn't give a flying whatever about being disliked. And that was actually Katie Hopkins. And so I had something of an admiration for that alone, not for what was coming out of her mouth, but the fact that she didn't care whether you loved her or liked her, right? And so I kind of admired that. And I think there is something in it. And I'm not basing this talk on the behavior of Katie Hopkins. Please understand that, not at all. But I want to talk about how the courage to be disliked, I think, is obviously, it's a very kind of tabloidy expression, but it's really about stopping people pleasing, learning to set and maintain decent boundaries, to practice saying no clearly and without over apologizing. Because what some people do is they say, no, I don't like your behavior, and then they feel really bad about it. And I've been one of those people. I felt really guilty when I've pulled up people that I like. And but I think it's really important to focus on self-compassion, not to be selfish to, you know, the exclusion of everybody else, but to focus on your own self-compassion and to challenge negative self-talk that kind of exists within you, and to consider yourself as the person who needs to have you need to put on the life surviving vest before anybody else. And a lot of people have not learned to do that. And there's nothing wrong with that. You cannot help a single other person while you are out there people pleasing. And so the courage to be disliked is really about saying no in many respects. The book actually isn't, but for me, the philosophy about it is about the courage to say no and prioritizing your own needs and challenging the negative self-talk that is within you. And some advice about how to do that, we've all had it, haven't we? And I had a discussion with a friend the other week, and actually it was my daughter. My daughter asked me a question. She said, when you hear that voice in your head, is it you or somebody else? And so those kind of things always get me thinking. And oftentimes it's other voices from when I was little, people telling me I couldn't do certain things. Not my own family. My own family believed I could do everything. But people around me, my teachers, didn't believe that I could do anything really. I was kind of like, you know, on the permanent naughty step, really. And so my advice to you is that if you want to start prioritizing yourself, and it's a good thing to do, but you don't know where to start, just take some small steps. begin by asserting yourself in really small, low stakes situations. So don't straight off the bat say no to your boss when they, ask you to necessarily to work overtime, but start to let your boss know that they might be overstepping the mark, right? Because now some people can really assert themselves straight away and just go, listen, you are taking liberties with me. I'm not doing this extra time and blah, blah, blah. But not everybody is like that. So if you're the person who's not like that, you have to do some inner work, obviously. And if you need to seek support, do seek support, consider professional help. But the most important thing is to identify your priorities. And your priorities are not always everybody else's priorities. Because one of the things that I very much realized later in life is it's not necessarily that people who are around me like me. They like having access to me. They like having me on their side, but it's not necessarily about liking me, although there are obviously some genuine people, but that works for everybody. People around us often work out what uses they can get from us. So you need to start prioritizing what you want from this life. And that is important. Lynn says, I seem to rub people up the wrong way. I get so confused by people's aggression. And yes, Rachel, the let them theory is also good. Now that's been, again, modernized by Mel Robbins, right? This whole idea of a person wants to behave like that, just let them. And I like that as well. And so I really like the idea of having the courage to be disliked, because it takes us away from people pleasing. And I think people pleasing is a really bad way to live one's life, because if you spend your whole life people pleasing, you will get to the end of it and you will be so aggrieved that you've done that. And so just start small, keep it simple, don't over apologize. You know what? If you're unable to do something, say something really simple like, I'm afraid I'm busy. Or don't even say I'm afraid. I'm afraid already sets you up. Just say I'm busy. Or no, I can't. But don't go into huge explanations why you can't do something, because you're already selling yourself short by doing that. And obviously it depends who it is. If it's a loved one who's asked you to do something, you can't do something with them, then you will explain fully. But if it's just somebody around you who wants you to do something and you feel obliged to them for some reason and you don't want to do it, you just don't do it. No, I can't do it. If you want to say sorry, that's fine, but try not to, because why should you be sorry? Why should you be afraid? And I think we have to start to change our language away from people pleasing, almost into a more belligerent way. And I don't mean that there's no need to be rude and aggressive with people, but oftentimes, especially when it comes to the sexist, women who assert themselves are often seen as, being problematic. And I know that. Easy Grow says people pleasing is a fake way to go. Cavan likes himself, and that's all that matters. Now, Kerry, this is a fair point, but some people get joy from pleasing others. They do. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know what? I love spending extra time in cooking meals and cooking food for people that I love. And I go to great lengths. I cook with love. So I totally get that. But this is about people sucking the life out of us. And this doesn't apply to everybody, obviously. 11, says Jacqueline. This doesn't apply to everybody. Anything I say at the end is really more about my experiences and what I've learned and what I feel works for me. And also based on a lot of the kind of comments that I receive from people. And emotional vampires. That is exactly right, Paul. So that's why I like to do these kind of end ones, and also to bring us up. And why ever not, after we might have had quite a heavy show. So listen, thank you so much for being here as always, because the reality is that if you are a people pleaser or if you are a giver, right, you are the one who needs to set limits. And you know why? Because takers rarely do, as the expression goes. Some people will just keep taking if you're a giver. So that's all I'm saying here. Certain circumstances, defo, steer well clear. Yes, got you, Kerry, got you. Kerry or Seri? Kerry, it's got to be Kerry, right? When you know you do wrong, change. Exactly that. Thank you, Adele. Thank you so much. Sometimes rudeness is needed with some people. It is, TD. It is, and that's right. And the reality is you are not designed for everyone to like you. You're not. What a weird world it would be if you were. So I just want to say thank you as ever to all of you wonderful people for being here in the live chat, wherever you're watching us. Have a wonderful bank holiday. Have a truly wonderful bank holiday. And I want to finish on a quote, because that's what we do around here. And that is, you are not required to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. You know, it's the truth, people. Have a wonderful bank holiday. Have a wonderful week. I will see you Friday. Lots of love to you. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Gwyneth, and everybody else on the live chat. Take care. See you Friday.